are momentarily live. So it is presentation laptop sound check, presentation laptop sound check, AFNA, no, January 14th, 2021. Clerk's laptop sound check, clerk's laptop sound check, AFNA, January 14th, 2021. Thank you very much for your patience and your time.
We will be flying at an altitude of 20,000 feet. Please make sure Okay, councillors, we are now live. I'd like to call the first meeting of the Audit Finance Administration Committee of 2021 to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during the committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or to make comments. I will now commence a roll call. Please indicate your presence when I call your name. Councillor Collins. Councillor Ferguson.
Present.
Good morning, sir. Councillor Johnson.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Partridge, she's away. A medical appointment. Councillor Pearson.
Present.
Morning. Councillor Vanderbeek.
I'm present. Good morning.
Good morning. And finally, Councillor Wilson.
Good morning.
Good morning. Item number 1, approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda today?
Yes, there are 3 changes. 1, added delegation request, item 5.3, Robert Ridley on behalf of Olympia Girl respecting a water billing charging anomaly for a future date. 1, added discussion item, item 9.4, protection of privacy policy FCS 21003 citywide. And 1, added notice of motion respecting Fame Forlani.
Excellent pronunciation. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Is there any discussion about the agenda? Seeing none, we'll have the vote, please. If you're having issues submitting your vote, please just give me a high sign. Councillor Vanderbeek, did you get the vote?
But I just would like to make a comment, if I could, before we move on in the agenda.
Is it about this vote?
No,
Okay, no problem. I'll come to you right after the vote.
thank you.
The vote is carried 6-0. Councillor, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just wanted to let you know that long enough, I will have to leave for a meeting at 12:30 with MPP Skelly and the Dundas Downtown BIA.
Oh, yes, we heard about that yesterday. Yep, no problem. Thank you for letting us
Right.
know.
Thank
Moving
you.
on to item number 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none, approval of the minutes of the previous meetings. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of the December 10th meeting? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move to the vote, please. Excellent. The vote is up. Councillor Collins. Thumbs up from Councillor Collins. And the vote carried 7-0. Thank you. We're moving on to delegation requests, item number 5.1. And I am going to butcher the name. My apologies to the delegate. Sanala Chaudhry, respecting a water bill of $2,193.34 for October the 18th to December the 18th through electric bill. This is for a future meeting. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the delegation request 5.1 for a future meeting? Moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Danko. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll have the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Danko, you're just sitting in today. See, I'm new to this chair job, and I got to get used to who's all on the committee. Not that I would have remembered from last year, and I'll shut up now. I'll use Councillor Ferguson as the seconder then. Y'all can laugh at me. It's okay, because I'm laughing at myself. Good morning, Councillor Danko. Welcome to our committee. Okay. Councillor Pearson and Councillor Collins. Thumbs up from both of them. Thank you, councillors. The vote carried 7-0. Item 5.2. is Kevin Rockman, Smart Centers REIT, respecting the staff report FCS 17008A, item 9.1 on today's agenda, on a request made on behalf of Smart Centers, and this is for today's meeting. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve this delegation request? Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Collins. And any discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to the vote. The vote's up. Councillor Collins is the thumbs up. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ferguson? Did you get it? Councillor Ferguson, we can't hear you, sorry. Thumbs up or thumbs down, Councillor Ferguson? Thumbs up, thank you. So we're now moving on. The vote carried 7-0, thank you. We're now moving on to item 5.3, which is Robert Ridley on behalf of Olympia Girl, respecting a water billing charging anomaly for a future meeting. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll have the vote. Councillor Collins, your thumbs up. Anyone else having bandwidth issues, just give me the thumbs up. Councillor Vanderbeek, did you get your vote through? I can tell by the surprised look. Yeah, and Councillor, we got it all. Perfect, thank you everyone. That's 7-0, it passed. So we're now moving on to item number 7 in our agenda, which is the public hearings, written delegations, and virtual delegations. 7.1, Kevin Rockman, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. If not, he will inform us in a moment. Smart Centers REIT, respecting the staff report. Before we begin, members are reminded that the questions of the delegations are for clarification purposes only and not for debate. Kevin Rockman is here with us virtually. There, he's nodding at me. How do you pronounce your last name?
Rockman's acceptable. We also go by Rackman.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome today, Kevin. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you very much. Most of you will recall that I made a presentation before this committee in October regarding Mountain Plaza Mall and our desire to have our development charges extended for that mall. We began the redevelopment of that mall in 2009 after purchasing it in 2006. We made further additions in 2012 and 2017, and the staff report on this had suggested that we are requesting unprecedented extension beyond 10 years, and I understand and accept that to be true. Large sites like this, as you can imagine, take time to develop, and as I said, every 3 to 4 years we add more to it as it becomes stable. The report also accurately notes that we've not submitted an application for the currently vacant land towards the northeast corner of Mountain Plaza Mall. And that's where we enter into a bit of a development paradox. I've not submitted an application because these development charge credits, which have a value of about $840,000, are an integral part of the financial viability of our next phase. And so staff is suggesting that without a development application, it's difficult to give an extension, and we're of the mind that without the development charge credits, we're not sure of the viability of the next phase. So we're stuck in a bit of a impasse in that way. And to that end, what I'd like to suggest is rather than the 5-year extension originally requested, we could, a compromise might be a 2 to 3 year extension, but with the provision or with the condition that within the next 9 months, Smart Centers submits its application as a stage gate. Failing that stage gate, we're done. We can't come back and ask you again. But it's just a way of the city ensuring that this extension, this further extension, has some real weight for us as a company, some targets to hit. So I'd like to suggest that I understand that ideally development would occur in a shorter period of time. It is difficult on these larger sites, but we do have a plan for mixed-use building on the vacant land, and that would be the first step that would then lead us to redevelop the corner of Upper James and Fennel per the city's official plan and zoning for high-density mixed use, and really create a feature on that corner where the remainder of the enclosed mall currently stands. But to do that, we need this first piece. So again, if a compromise is to be made, I would ask for a 2 to 3 year extension with a stage gate for the submission of an application by our company. I thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rockman. So do we have any questions from any of the councillors? Seeing none. So I thank you for your presentation today. I need a motion to receive the presentation, moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Pearson, and that's an electronic vote, which will be coming up shortly. Pardon me? Oh, just, sorry. That was my fault now. I got too many things open on my screen. And that vote carried 7-0. And just give me a second to catch up on my... Thank you. So now we're moving on to item number 9.1, which is a development charge DC demolition credit extension request 651677 Upper James Street, Mountain Plaza Mall, FCS 17008. I need a mover and a seconder to approve item number 9.1. Do I have a mover for the motion? Councillor Johnson, you have questions?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it was the wording that threw me off. I would be moving to put it on the table to discuss.
Yes.
This is 9.1 development charge, right?
That is my fault.
Okay, no. I just want to make sure.
Yep. No,
I'll move it to put it on the table, please.
We're putting it on the floor. So it's moved by Johnson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. And are you wishing to speak to this, Councillor Johnson, since you still have the floor?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask the staff a question. After reading the report, understandably, after listening to the delegate, being in between the rock and a hard place. So just to ask the staff, if we did pass it with a 2 to 3 year extension, with the caveat that a submission has to be completed and submitted within that 2 to 3 years, would that be more acceptable?
Mr. McMullen?
So through the chair, I know we've invited Jason Thorne to the meeting to talk about the planning issues on that.
Yes.
And staff have been in contact with finance staff have been in contact with Jason and his staff. So Jason might be better to answer that particular question. Regarding the exemption, so the $840,000 that is in our report, that would still have to be funded regardless of whether it's an extension of 2 to 3 years or 5 years. Or no years,
So just to finish off that questioning for a minute, please, because you just struck another one. So if the extension is granted, the money would have to be paid from somewhere, but then would that money not be reimbursed after the 2 to 3 years of the submission has been paid?
Mr. McMullen?
And I mean reimbursed by the applicant, not reimbursed by another department.
So through the chair, just so in the future, when those funds are then received with the development charge application, those funds would then go to the DC, go right to the DC reserves.
So theoretically, Mr. McMillan, the DCs would not exist if it were not for the application. if we grant them 2 to 3 years to submit their application, then the DCs would then take effect after the 2 to 3 years extension is over. Then they would be paying that 800,000 plus DC fee. If we don't give them the extension, there is no DCs to be collected anyways. So would it not just be the same scenario? We're just taking from one to the other and temporarily until it gets repaid by the applicant?
So through the chair, I'll pass that over to Lindsay just on as far as the process and how we've handled these in the past. Lindsay Gillies.
Ms. Gillies, please.
Thank
Good
you.
morning, Lindsay.
Through the chair. So what would happen at the time of a future development is we would calculate how much is owing in DCs based on what is being developed. The way that we would collect those DCs would typically be fully from the developer. If we provide an extension of this credit, then we would collect all except for that credit from the developer, and the credit would need to be funded from city DC sources. So there wouldn't be an impact until the future development occurs. It would be who pays what piece of the cost at that time.
So thanks, Lindsay. So here's where my question is. If the application hasn't been submitted, there is no development to happen at all. The 2 to 3 years extension is just to allow them time to get their plan together and to send it forward. Why would we need the money in the meantime?
It would be requiring that council commit to funding that money in the future once the development proceeds, because they'd be committing to the extension of that credit. So we need to assure that we have funding in place to provide that at that time.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's a very reasonable request, 2 to 3 year extension with the caveat that there's a submission by the company. If there wasn't, then that extension or the monies would not be granted. Thank you.
Would you like
These
to
are
hear
my
from
questions.
Mr. Thorne?
Yes,
on the
please.
2 to
Sorry. My apologies, Mr. Thorne.
No problem. Mr. Thorne, are you still there?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development. So I can speak really in terms of the, I'll say the viability of the development schedule. And whether or not council wants to approve the DC exemption credit is of course in council's hands. In terms of a site plan application, what we usually advise applicants is that it's about a 6 to 12 month approval period for a site plan application. So if the applicant is suggesting they would submit a site plan within about 9 months, add 6 or 12 months to that, and that would be the period at the point after which we'd be in a position to issue a building permit. So if the request is 9 months for them to get the site plan in, and then 2 to 3 years extension to apply for the building permit, I would say that from a planning standpoint, development could reasonably be expected to proceed in. But of course, that is all dependent upon the applicant first filing the site plan application. They would then get a conditional approval and them providing the necessary documentation to clear those site plan conditions. So there has been a site plan approved on this site close to 10 years ago. And so development has been happening and proceeding in phases. But in terms of whether or not development could feasibly happen within that timeline, I would say yes, just with the caveat that there really, from a planning standpoint, hasn't been anything preventing the development happening to date either.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thorne. I really appreciate those responses. I think my only question then would be, would COVID have anything to do with even more delay? But I think that's a crystal ball situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a number of speakers lined up. Councillor Johnson is done. Councillor Ferguson, Pearson, and Danko. Councillor Ferguson, please. And again, just a reminder, I'm only timing your questions, and then I stop the clock for the answer so that you don't lose your 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. I think Brenda asked pretty much most of the questions I was going to ask. So, because I just want to be clear, he's suggesting that they need 9 months to put the application in. And I hear GM Thorne say that they need 6 to 12 months to process it. So the ask is that the site plan be approved within 2 to 3 years, or is the construction have to be complete in 2 to 3 years? Because then we can start collecting taxes once the construction is complete. So can I just get clarity? Is it 2 to 3 years to get a site plan approved, or to actually have the construction finished?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Thorne, please.
Yeah, so through the chair, in terms of the paying of the DCs, they'd have to pay the DCs when they get their building permit. So they can't get their building permit until they have their site plan approval and their building permit approved. So that's the thing that would have to happen within the 2 to 3 years. How long it takes to actually construct, I couldn't speak to that, and it would depend, of course, on what they're actually constructing.
No, I think you answered my question that the 2 to 3 years is when they got to have the site plan approved and the building permit obtained. And the site plan that was originally done, did it show this area that's going to be constructed now, the original site plan that was approved about 10 years ago?
Mr. Thorne.
So through the chair, it was a phased site plan. So the original site plan, my reflection was it did look at the entire site and then anticipated building it out in phases. And there have been over the years various modifications to the site plan as the applicant's plans changed, or once they confirm tenants, that would confirm kind of the form of construction they would need. So it has been, I'd characterize a bit of an evolving site plan over the years as the applicant modified and adjusted their plans.
So would it take 6 to 12 months for your staff to process when they already have a site plan? They're just amending it with this next phase?
So through the chair, it's a good question, possibly not, but I don't want to, not seeing what the actual site plan includes and how much it might deviate from kind of what we have seen in the past. I wouldn't be able to say, but if it is just if it's a minor project or a minor modification to what we've seen before, if it's just putting I don't know, a pad for a fast food store or something like that, those don't take as long. If we're talking about a mixed use building with residential, those would take longer to approve. So I'm just suggesting the 6 to 12 months because that's usually the ballpark that we give to an applicant when they're asking us how long site plan approval takes.
Okay, and my last question is, did I hear him say there's residential units? Are they going to put a residential component in this addition, amount of commercial zoning?
Mr. Thorne.
So through the chair, I can tell you that such a thing is permitted. Actually, that was a city initiative to proactively rezone this site to permit residential. And I would say that is kind of the vision of the city of what I think the preference would be is to see some mixed use redevelopment of the site. I couldn't speak to what and I know they have talked about it before on the site, but I'm sure I don't know the details of whether or not that is actually what the applicant would be submitting when they suggested they'd be able to submit something in the next 9 months. I don't know if that would include a residential component or not.
Okay, just some comments, Mr. Chair, if you allow me now, if I get the time. But
yes, you do.
Okay, thank you. $850,000 is a lot of money for both sides. And so this is a tough one. It sounds like if they don't get the exemption that they won't go ahead, so we don't get the tax revenue then. And we won't get the DCs either if they don't go ahead. With COVID, it's put a lot of strain on a lot of people. And I'm surprised that someone who's in the retail business is actually doing an expansion during these times when most retail is closed right now due to the COVID shutdown, and bricks and mortars are becoming less and less popular with the everybody getting used to online shopping and curbside pickup. So I got mixed feelings on this. I could go either way. I hate giving up $850,000 to our DC fund, but we probably won't get it anyway because they simply won't proceed. And then we eventually get the tax revenue, which could be quite substantial for this. So I'll give it some thought. We'll hear from other members of the committee, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Much appreciated. Our next speaker is Councillor Pearson, please. Sorry, you'll have to turn your mic on.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. There's 2 buttons. Some days it's only 1. Some days it's 2. The machine is possessed. What can I say?
I push many more buttons than 2 a day, let me tell you. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a couple of questions I just want to ask, whether it's Jason or Brian. I'm just going through the report, and I'm in the same position as Councillor Ferguson. I'm indifferent on here because, recognizing we're in COVID, but this originally started in 2015 because there was an original. Originally the DC extension expired in 2015. They requested the extension and got it. They requested a further extension in 2000 and I think it was 17. They did do some building, but anyways, I just want to ask. So. What was I going to say? So there's one component in here we haven't touched on. What happens with the education DCs, Brian or Jason? Do they still have to be paid to the school board? Because we're not exempt from that, right?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. McMullen?
Sorry, so yeah, so through the chair, yeah, education DCs still have to be paid. We don't, so City Council doesn't have authority to change those.
Okay, but we don't pay anything until they put in the permits, correct?
So through the chair, correct.
Okay,
yeah.
So we're not out anything right now. And the next question is, and this probably to Jason. So Jason, if they do come back with the, and I know you said the zoning, we amended zoning recently, that would allow residential. But would that not be a longer process? Because I'm reading through here, it's a combined sewer system. Would that not bring into play a number of other issues that are going to have to be dealt with the development, incorporating residential?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Thorne?
So through the chair, yes, it would, although the larger hurdles of a rezoning or an official plan amendment application should not be required, because like I said, the council has sort of proactively pre-zoned the site for that sort of use. So as long as they're keeping within those zoning permissions, that step wouldn't be required. The 6 to 12 month I mentioned for site plan, the more towards the 12-month side of that is what we would typically look at if it is a residential project. So that 12-month site plan would be typical of a mixed-use project with a residential tower, those sorts of things. That gives us enough time to look at issues of traffic and servicing, and so that 6 to 12 month estimate would capture a more ambitious project.
Thank you. And I guess I'm just going to go back to the nuts and bolts of it. So the request that's being made today is not the 5-year extension that was in the letter. It's potentially, it may be the gentleman could re-clarify, or can staff just kind of give us an input of, where they are with regards to this further request, the change to his request, because I believe it was some other points that were raised in it. Brian?
Yeah, so through the chair, Mr. Rackman suggested 2 to 3 years rather than the 5-year extension that was in the letter in our report. In our report, recommendation A was suggesting that 5-year extension be denied. So now I guess we'd have to put a motion on the floor if you wanted to then change recommendation A in our report rather than the 5 years to go to 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. There was one other condition he added, something about some checkpoints or something. And I apologize, I didn't write it down as he was just explaining it.
Yeah, so through the chair, what I also heard was that, that he would require up to 9 months to submit the site plan application. So those would be conditions of the allowing an extension of 2 to 3 years, and I guess we would have to pick 2 or 3 years in the recommendation.
Right. Okay, but the 2 or 3 years includes the 9 months to submit, obviously.
Yes.
Correct. That it would be within the 2. So I'm leaning more towards the 2 years, and in that 2 years, he has to submit within 9 months a site plan.
Mr. McMullen?
Through the chair, through the chair, that's my understanding as well. I don't know if Jason Thorne would clarify that again based on the discussion earlier.
Mr. Thorne?
Through the chair, yes, I would think if what council decided to do was to extend the demolition credit for 2 years, then they would have to pull a building permit within 2 years.
Okay.
And a gate post within that would be if they have to make their site plan application at the 9-month mark. So if they miss the 9-month mark, then the DC extension would be invalid.
Got it.
I'd have to ask finance how we actually raise that, because I haven't seen it done that way before. But that's what I understood the request to be.
So then you've raised a good point, Jason. So is it better if we give direction today and send staff back to bring us back the report of how it would work, or staff would make it work subject to the motion today?
So
Mr.
the chair
Collins
would ask
first.
finance what sort of if they can think of language today that would put that into effect. Like I said, it's a bit of an unusual approach, and so I don't know if finance would be able to take that as direction today, or if they would need more time to craft that.
Right.
Mullen or
Yes.
Mr. Zagaric?
Yeah, so through the chair, I can start. Yeah, and I think what we have to also pay attention to is that the 2025 deadline, January 12th, 2025, this demolition credit extension ended last January, not this January. So we would actually want to pick a date of possibly 2 years from today, or from January 12th, I guess, essentially, 2 years from today. But we can craft something and have that for council, if you'd like, or we can quickly do something.
Councillor?
Thank you, and so thank you very much for that. And I this is the first time I recall that anybody's come back this many times for an extension on DC. So recognizing that, I'll listen to the rest of the points, but I'm leaning to, and I'd be prepared to put the motion for a 2-year. And the reason I'm going to say that I'm supportive of that, and I know staff are probably cringing, but we are in the midst of COVID, and it's put a huge wrench in everything that goes on around us right now, including building and getting tenants, whatever, in the commercial field. So, this will be going into 20, and 2021 will be the 2 years. So I'm kind of leaning towards that, and I'd be happy to put that motion on when we get to that point, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The speaker list for everyone's edification is Councillor Collins, Wilson, Vanderbeek, and Danko. Councillor Collins, please. You're up next, sir.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, I can. Please proceed.
Terrific. I'm definitely supportive of what Councillor Pearson just referenced. I want to make sure, though, that with the previous points that were raised in terms of recouping tax dollars that would assist with the recovery with the DCs, I do recall many years ago that there was a site plan, I think, that was illustrated to a number of councillors. But this is when the Rymal project and my Centennial project were in the works as well. And I thought that it was ground floor commercial along Fennel with low-lying residential. And I can't recall whether it was 4 to 6 stories at that point in time. It wasn't a tower. And I just want to make sure that if we're acquiescing today to the extension, that we're going to see some substantive residential rather than possibly, and again, I'm going from memory, and that plan's probably 6 or 7 years old, if not older. I just want to make sure that the development is of a scale that will recoup tax dollars, which I think is the intent around the table in terms of offering some assistance, seeing development for a site that's pretty choppy right now. But if I could, through you, can I ask Kevin whether or what kind of plan they're looking at, and is it different than the one that was circulated many years ago for the same site?
You're speaking about the delegate now, Councillor?
Yes, if I could. I just want to make sure that the plans for residential are not low-lying residential, which I'm almost certain that the original plan for this site was it might have been 4 to 6 stories. I'm going from memory, and I want to make sure it is a tower, and so that the tax base is something substantive.
Thank you. Mr. Rockman, are you still on the line?
I am.
Can you respond to Councillor Collins' questions, please?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, Councillor Collins, the development to which these development charge credits would apply is for the vacant parcel, and we're not envisioning residential there. We're going to do retail there in order to find a home for our long-standing tenants within the remainder of the enclosed mall along the Fennel frontage. And then on the Fennel frontage, we would then be in the position in a further application to the one that we're talking about this year to build, yes, mid-rise. There's a 40-meter allowance, height allowance for that Fennel and Upper James frontage, and it's that corner where we would be doing, as you phrased it, substantial residential. Yes.
Okay, so a
phase
two-phased approach. It's essentially developing the east side of the property and then onto the residential on the corner.
Mr. Ackman,
right. And on the east, yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct. And one more point, if I may, the application we intend to submit, Mr. Chair, this year, in addition to the GFA that would envelop the remaining DC credits, we're actually looking to build something that will also include us paying 2 times that amount in DC. So our GFA is 3 times the credit limit. So the credit would only be for 1/3. So we'd still be paying 1.7 million in DCs for the remainder based on the calculations we see in front of us.
Terrific. Thanks for the clarification, Kevin. I appreciate that. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be willing to support Councillor Pearson's direction with, as Brian, I think, alluded to, staff coming back between now and council with the appropriate wording, understanding the intent of the committee if it passes by majority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The next speaker is Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my comments are going to be brief. I just going on my stock market site. Smart Centers is a corporation with $9.4 billion in assets. They have a profit margin of 14.32%. And in this year of COVID, their share price as of November the 16th went up by 20.38%. I'm having a hard time, frankly, feeling sympathy here. They've had this development and the plans for some time. They've received extensions. This community, they're based in Vaughan. I don't think we're in a position in which to extend this further, and I certainly wouldn't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vanderbeek, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things. I have some concerns about the 2 years based on reality. It is COVID. COVID's not over. It's not like we're moving out of COVID. It's the impacts on retail in particular are significant, and it does take time. It takes time to get through our processes, and I want to be sure that Councillor Pearson said was, I want to be sure that this is what I heard is what she meant. She said this would be a 20 and 21. The 2 years would be 2021 is what I heard. I'm assuming it's 21, 22. So I'd just like to have clarification on that if I could, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Vanderbeek, for requesting the clarification. My comment had to do with the fact that we have been in COVID since 2020, March, and we will obviously be in it again this year. So there's 2 years right there. Not that it starts, so now we're already 2021 as far as this extension would commence. January, as Brian mentioned, if we extend it to January 12th, no, sorry, today's the 14th, sorry, to January 14th, whatever, staff will pick 2 years from today. That's my point, was just the fact that we are in COVID, we have been, and we do anticipate this whole year being a wash as well. Thank you. Not a wash.
Thank you for that clarification. And through you, Mr. Chair, well, not really, I guess to you, Mr. Chair, I still have concerns about 2 years. I understand the intent. I'm just worried that they have to have a building permit submitted and paid for in order to, or being paid for, in order to be able to claim this exemption, and it's an exemption, for me, I personally, I would rather see it 3 years, just because I don't want them to have to come back. And I think this needs to be their last extension. And so I'm concerned that we're going to get down the road and then all of a sudden they need another year. And so I'd rather give it to them now. The DCs don't kick in until the point where they owe them. The exemption doesn't kick in until the point where they are assessed their DCs. So we're not paying anything until they're assessed their DCs and the exemption kicks in. And given the situation with COVID, I think that even the processes here may take longer than normal. And so I'm just concerned that reality might get in the way of what their good intentions. I do think that there should be a condition that the site plan, if we're going to approve this, should be a condition, I like his condition, of the site plan having to be submitted within 9 months. And so then we know they're moving forward. I totally agree with Councillor Ferguson. Yes, it is a difficult decision because it's a lot of money, but if we don't exempt the DCs and if we don't extend the exemption and they don't go forward, there will be no development there, at least in the near future. And that means no additional taxes and no additional development charges as they move forward with the rest of the development and this development, because these development charges may not cover the development charges owing, and they may have to pay those additional charges at the time they submit the building. Well, they will have to if they're over the amount. I am supportive of a hand up here, but I don't want to put them in a tenuous position in 18 months where everybody's scrambling, because we all know then that they can't make the 2-year limit for various reasons of perhaps not even their fault. So I'm asking my colleagues to think about, if you are leaning toward approving this, to think about whether or not the 2 years is realistic, or whether it would be worth extending it to 3, so we don't have to go through this again. And so that they have some confidence in moving forward. That doesn't mean that they can take longer than 9 months to get their site plan application in. The process would have to start expeditiously. So those are my comments. I just want to make sure that this development is feasible and moves forward if possible, given the times we're in and the realities of how things work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Next speaker is Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as this development is in Ward 8, it's a very prominent site in Ward 8. So I appreciate committee's indulgence in providing me the opportunity to speak this afternoon, or sorry, still morning. So if I could just ask General Manager Thorne, the history of the development credit exemption for demolition, why there's a time limit on that in the first place, and some history, if we've ever extended it and why.
Thank you. Mr. Thorne, please.
So through the chair, so the basis for having a demolition credit in the first place is that the DCs are intended to pay for servicing and infrastructure, and the assumption is that if there was a building there before, there was already some servicing associated with it, and so the new development would get the credit of that existing servicing capacity. So that's why there is DC credits or demolition credits. The ability to extend, there is some staff delegated authority to extend those DC credits beyond the 5 years. If in cases where there was delays beyond the developer's control, is the way the bylaw is written. So I have in the past used that delegated authority to provide extensions usually in one of two cases. Sometimes if there's an LPAT appeal of their planning approval, which delays them by a couple of years. Another common one is when you run into brownfields record of site condition issues. That tends to delay projects. So there's been cases in the past where I've used that delegated authority. If it doesn't meet that test, then it comes to council. So that's the case here. I was asked, was there delays beyond the developer's control in this application that would allow me to use my delegated authority? And my conclusion was that there was not, which is why it's in front of you. So the reason for the credits expiring, I would say there's two primary reasons. One is that the hope and intention is that after demolition, redevelopment will proceed quickly. And I know that's a question that council has often asked when these requests are made is, has the applicant and developer been making all reasonable efforts to keep development proceeding and keep momentum going on the site? It's not intended to allow sites to sit vacant for long periods of time. And the other reason is for having an expiry date is that at a certain point, the available capacity that was deemed to have been supporting the original development is kind of reabsorbed back into the system. So at some point, the philosophy and basis for the extension is lost if too many years lapse. So I don't know if that answers the councillor's question. In terms of the previous extensions on this one, I think that is outlined in the report, and I don't have it on my screen at the moment, but I believe there was two previous extensions since the demolition credit was approved.
Thank you, councillor.
Thank you. My understanding is the Center Mall development is the only other application that got up to a 10-year extension, and no other development has ever gone over a 10-year extension. Mr.
Thorne?
Through the chair, that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, but I couldn't say definitively if that's the case or not. I don't know if Lindsay or Finance has any other examples that they can think of.
Yeah. So through the chair, Councillor Danko is correct. I believe the Center Mall is the only other development, and by coincidence, a retail development that has had an extension similar period as the Mountain Plaza.
Thank you, councillor.
And in the report, I'll note that the amount of taxes that Smart Centers is paying on the vacant property right now is just over $13,000 a year. Whereas if they would have developed it as they promised to do a decade ago, they would be paying $266,000 a year. So in the span of the time that this should have been developed, we've missed out on hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more than $1 million of tax revenue. Is that correct, Mr. Thorne?
Mr. Thorne or Mr. Zagaric?
Through the chair, that may be a better one for Mr. Zagaric.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, the report does reference that 45,000 square feet of retail space at today's tax rates would represent about $266,000 in municipal taxes.
Annually. A year.
Annually.
Annually. Thank you. So my thoughts on this, as I mentioned, that this is a very prominent site in Ward 8. It's a very busy and retail with the Walmart Plaza, with the Center Mall. There was a lot of discussion about what this was going to be developed into, again, a decade ago when this was originally demolished. And frankly, this is a property that Smart Centers is pretty much forgot about for over, at least 5 years and longer than that. The property that we're talking about is a field of rubble and weeds with a snow fence around it. And it's been like that for ages, well, pretty much since the demolition, which was, again, 10 years ago. So, I understand Smart Center's rationale for coming to committee to asking for an exemption. It's worth $850,000 to them, so why not? But in my opinion, opportunity to develop this site. And in fact, they've already had an extension 5 years ago, and they still continued to sit on it and did nothing. And what this committee has before us today is basically a plan that's on the back of a napkin. There's nothing substantial here to base an exemption of this magnitude in a promise that it will actually be developed in the next few years. This has nothing to do with COVID. COVID is the past year. They could have developed this property at any time, in the past 10 years. And no other development in the city of Hamilton has been extended this long. And the whole purpose of having a time limit is to make sure that developers follow through on what they promise. And this developer, in this case, has not. So, you know, in the meantime, as General Manager Thorne and Mr. Zagaric have said, the taxpayers of the city of Hamilton have lost out on hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax revenue. So by denying the extension, at the very least, we recover a portion of that lost tax revenue, because the development could still move forward. They just lose that credit of $840,000. Just yesterday, we had a presentation to GIC that all members of the committee were present for, where Planning and Economic Development presented their economic action plan from 2016 to 2020, and we saw that there was 7 million square feet of industrial commercial space developed in the city of Hamilton in the past 5 years. We've hit over $1 billion in building permits every year for the past 10 years, or sorry, 9 out of the last 10 years. And just in 2020, we hit $1.7 billion in industrial and commercial value in building permits. So again, there is no reason why the city of Hamilton needs to chase developers, especially a developer that with the resources of Smart Centers, a $9.4 billion corporation. So, you know, the residents of Ward 8 definitely want to see this site developed. I want to see this site developed. I've had a number of conversations with Mr. Reichman and Smart Centers for their plans for the site. You know, there are development opportunities here. I have development applications all the way along Upper James from end to end. Enticing development is not an issue in Ward 8 in this specific location or anywhere in the city. We're not in the point where we need to make these kinds of concessions to large development companies such as Smart Centers.
Councillor, you have exceeded your 5 minutes, so if you could wrap up, please. Thank
you, Mr. Chairman. So, you know, I fully support the staff recommendation to deny this. I don't support an extension because we need somebody to develop this site. We need a viable plan. If there was a consultation with staff, if there was something that was actually on the table, maybe, but there's not. There's nothing here. And perhaps, you know, maybe Smart Centers isn't the right owner for this property. If they can't develop it in a timely manner, they could easily sell it to somebody who would be willing to, and there are definitely buyers out there that would be able to do that. So I would, as the ward councillor, encourage committee to deny this application to extend, and you know, just think about the duty to taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Seeing no further speakers, Councillor Wilson, if you could take the chair, please, as the past chair. A couple of questions for Mr. Thorne, I believe. What's the impact of COVID-19 been on our applications, on our processing of applications in the development department?
So through the so through the chair, in terms of application volume, and I'll be providing some details to this in council in a couple of weeks. We are down. We're historically in about 1,100 applications per year. We're down somewhere between 8 to about 800 or 900 in 2020. So it's down a bit, but not, I would say, not drastically. In terms of processing of applications, I think it's quite notable that Hamilton actually never stopped doing processing, receiving, approving development applications. Site plan in particular never stopped because that's actually a delegated staff approval authority. So we did have a brief period of time where planning committee and committee of adjustment could not meet. So any applications that had to go to them were delayed by a couple of months. That wasn't the case with site plan because that's a staff approval authority. So in terms of timelines, I would characterize it as we have seen a little bit of a delay in terms of our processing timelines, and by a little bit, there's some areas where we've seen things take a few weeks longer. But it is not. COVID did not have a drastic or significant impact in terms of our approval timelines, really with the only two exceptions being that period of time when there was no planning committee and committee of adjustment, which did slow things down for things like minor variances and rezonings, but again, not site plan.
Excuse me.
Thank you. And so now I'll just make some brief comments, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. When I heard about the COVID issue, and it struck me because my understanding is basically what Mr. Thornhead has just provided us, is that for all intents and purposes in the city of Hamilton, the planning process, the application process, none of that has changed. We're still offering the same services. Yes, we're down some applications, but we're doing our job. And in some cases, we were behind by the most a couple of months. So I understand that there's trepidation about what COVID is going to bring in the future. But from my perspective, I drove by the property. I have to say that I'm profoundly disappointed that Smart Centers has not acted quicker. They could have easily got that development underway within the timelines that were provided in the last 10 years. And so an extension for me is problematic and I can't support it. I'll take the chair back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll be supporting the staff recommendation. Okay, seeing that, are there any further speakers, Madam Clerk? I'm seeing a shaking of heads. So does a councillor have a motion for me then?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So you'd be, we already have the motion moved, correct, Madam Clerk? And so now if the councillors want to change the timelines, they would need to amend that, correct? Councillor Pearson, do you have something in mind?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I will put it on the floor to amend the recommendation that we allow a 2-year extension period stop, and that it be that a gate post, as was mentioned by Councillor or by Mr. Thorne, be at the 9-month mark, that they must have a submission of site plan that should be submitted that indicates this development will be moving forward. And if I can speak to that.
So to be clear, you're saying that they must submit their site plan within the first 9 months?
Within 9, correct.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So if I can speak to that, and I certainly understand all the comments around the table. I don't believe, I'm just wondering now. Yeah, so I just want to.
Oh, sorry, Councillor. Sorry, just for a second. I need a
seconder
on this. Councillor
Sorry,
Collins,
yes.
you had indicated.
Thought, where did he go? Nope.
If you can just give us an indication.
I second that for sure.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay. Thank you, and I understand the trepidation, and I think that they come forward, and my comment with regards to COVID is not the fact that it hasn't slowed things down in our building department. I understand that, but there has been some issues in developments and companies. We all know businesses are shutting down. There's people that are very, very cautious of whether they're going forward with businesses into the future. So obviously, I'm sure this is affecting a market out there as well. Not our building department, obviously. But it's the bricks and mortars part about this. I feel that the 2-year puts their feet to the fire and says, you know what, do it, or this is it. I'm not going to say much more. I think it's imperative that we continue to see development going in Hamilton. We've been doing very, very well. I was pleased to hear the comments that, if they do move ahead, they're looking at triple the growth and development for this piece of land, which is certainly a good indication of further DCs to come in, albeit not even using the credits, but also the increase in taxes. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll put it on the floor, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Collins.
And so we need to include a funding source for the unallocated reserve of $840,099. Madam Clerk, do you have that? Thank you. Are there any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you. Listening to Councillor Danko's speech, it sort of tweaked a few things for me. Is there any way in this amendment that we can put a hard, fast will not come back again. This is one and only time. This is it. I don't know. It's how do we firm this up so that it's not left open so that anybody can come back and ask again, but this has got to be something that on the condition they do not come back again and ask for another extension.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Zagarek, any suggestions?
So through the chair, it's my understanding that council could put any terms or conditions on it. So if it's the will of committee and council to suggest this is a final extension, I'll just note that the next term of council they could come back and it'd be a new council, wouldn't require reconsideration. But again, it's a discretion of council to put further terms or conditions on the extension.
Thank you.
Okay. I still would like, thank you, Mr. Zagarek. Through you, Chair, I'd still like to see something on there that said that no more extensions to be given to this property, not just this application, but that entire address.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson, do you have a comment on, it's your motion?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think I mentioned full stop, meaning no further extensions. That's
Beautiful.
what I said, so thank you.
Does that work for you, Councillor Johnson? I'm seeing her shaking her head. Yes, thank you. Further speakers, Madam Clerk? Seeing no further speakers, so we now will need the vote on the amendment. Madam Clerk, could you read the amendment for everyone?
So I've put it on the screen, but it's that the city, sorry, let me that the city demolition credits for Mountain Plaza Mall, 651, 677 Upper James Street be extended for an additional 2 years, be approved and funded by unallocated capital reserve for $840,000 and $840,099 with the following conditions: that the site plan be submitted within 9 months, and that no further extension will be granted for this property.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Wilson, please.
I'd like to speak to the amendment, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. As per my previous comments, I will not be supporting this amendment. I do support the staff recommendation. This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation who financially has not been impaired by COVID. Mr. Thorne's overview of our development applications and our activity reveals that COVID
What does that mean, Brian?
Is not an impediment to development. Our activity with respect to permits and construction has not been impeded. We have an ability to pay issue here in Hamilton. Mr. Zagarek reminded us of that during our last budget deliberation, in which he said that our incomes in Hamilton have not been rising compared to our neighboring municipalities. This cost will have to be borne by our taxpayers. It is not these folks have an ability to pay. They have had an extension. This is going to break with precedent. We are setting a new precedent. We are enabling. If they wanted to develop, they had the means to do so. And as the ward councillor has reminded us, he is busy, as is the planning department, with applications up and down that boulevard and across. I cannot support this amendment. These folks do a lot of business. They are huge. They know exactly what they're doing, and I give them full credit for pushing on this, but we just do not have the financial means to cover this. They certainly do. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could take the chair just for a second, Councillor Wilson.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to be clear, I can't support the amendment. I understand the compassion that is being exhibited by the councillors. I fully understand their intention. They're trying to do everything they can to incentivize new development and get this property developed the way it was supposed to be developed 10 years ago. And that's the key point for me. 10 years ago. 10 years ago, a company like Smart Centers, which is highly resourced, incredibly competitive, has all of the means and the abilities to do what needed to be done within that 10 years, and they didn't do it. And now they're asking for another extension. I can't support that. I have problems with that. This is now will be the second time that a large development like this has been given such an extension. And we certainly do not want it to be a precedent where in the future someone's going to come forward and say, well, you did it for the downtown mall, you did it for the mountain mall, why won't you do it for us? And that's the challenge that I'm having. So I appreciate the intention, Councillor Pearson, believe me, I do, but I can't support the amendment. Thank you very much. I'll take the chair back, and I don't see any other speakers, Madam Clerk, is that correct? Seeing none, then we'll have the vote now on the amendment, please. It's an electronic on your screen, folks. Oops. There we go. Councillor Vanderbeek, Councillor Collins is a thumbs up. Is that everybody? The vote carried on a divided vote, 4 in favor and 3 opposed. Thank you, councillors. Do I have to do anything else on this now that we've amended this, or we're done? So now we need to vote on the motion as amended. Councillor Pearson and Councillor Collins. And the vote will come up momentarily. So this is just on the motion as amended. And again, it was a divided vote, 4 in favor and 3 opposed. Thank you, councillors. We're now moving on. We're 9.2. Thank you, Mr. Rockman, for attending. You're free to go now. 9.2, 2020 City of Hamilton External Audit Plan, FCS2 1002 citywide. Rick Mail, are you introducing this report?
Through you, Mr. Chair. This is an annual report that's submitted by the external auditors to council so that they can outline what process they'll be going through in evaluating the city's financial condition and the risks associated with the audit. And the auditors are here should committee have any questions. And the existing partner with KPMG on the city audit is Lois Willette. She's retiring shortly, and she would like an opportunity to at least introduce the replacement partner for the audit going forward.
Thank you very much. So councillors, in your agenda, there is the Appendix A, which is the presentation from KPMG. Ms. Willette, you have the floor, please.
Hello and good morning. Thank you very much for this opportunity to come before you. It's been my pleasure to serve as your lead audit engagement partner since 2012. And as Rick said, I will be retiring in September. I will be around for this year's audit to make sure that the audit goes smoothly and that there's a good transition from myself to my fellow partner, Carlos Alvarez, who has joined me on video. So I'd like to introduce you to Carlos. Carlos is a partner in our Hamilton office, and he has been working on municipal files for about 10 years or more, most recently in our Calgary office. And Carlos has come home to Hamilton and has been back in Hamilton now for 3 years. And so I'm pleased to introduce you to Carlos. Carlos will be signing the audit report this year. But as I said, I will be assisting with the transition and making sure that the knowledge of your organization that I have transitions to Carlos. So Carlos.
Thank you. A belated welcome home to Carlos. Carlos, would you like to say a few words, please?
Absolutely. Through you, the chair, I look forward to working with the city of Hamilton. I have been with KPMG for over 20 years. And Lois and I have worked together for many, many years. I do like to remind everyone that, there's a large audit team, that are behind Lois and I, and we do have, quite a bit of continuity, at that level. And, the one silver lining, about having a new partner sort of come on board is, it does provide a fresh set of eyes. Not to say that there's anything contentious or anything difficult with the audit, but it just provides an added level of, call it security, just to make sure that everything's done correctly. There is one new accounting standard that we'll have to tackle, one new auditing standard. But, I look forward with working with Lois. She has a tremendous amount of knowledge. Much of it resides up here in her mind, but I do look forward to the year ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually, and we may have a few questions here, so please stand by. Councillor Ferguson, please. You're the first speaker on the list.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate Lois on her retirement. And I know it's a major milestone in your life, and I'm sure you've got plans going forward. And but once again, just congratulations. And I think by Lois retiring, it may have answered my question. And my question is that a few years ago, there was legislation put in place as a result of the Enron bankruptcy and the demise of a very large accounting firm. And it was put forward by 2 U.S. senators. I believe it's picked up in Canada also, where the lead auditor must change every 5 years. It sounds like Lois has been our lead auditor for 12 years. So is that still legislation in Canada, or is that just in the U.S.?
It is legislation for public companies, but it wouldn't translate to an audit of the city. However, KPMG internally has required us to have an internal rule where there's partner rotation on files after 10 years. So I would
after 10 years.
I would be coming up for partner rotation on your audit in any rate, even if I haven't retired.
Thank you.
Okay. As I recall with the Enron situation, they found that the Arthur Anderson had been with Enron for quite some time. And the relationship between management and the lead auditor got too cozy, which resulted in a lot of things being passed over, if you will. I'm using layman's language, and I'm trying to be careful how I select my words. But through you, if I can, then to Mike Zagaric. Mike, are we okay with a 10-year rotation, or should we be looking at the U.S. model, which is 5 years? How do you feel about that?
Thank you. Mr. Zagaric, please.
Yeah. So through the chair, I think there's some benefits of having continuity. I trust the professional guidance of KPMG and as it relates to their internal staff and what they feel is appropriate. And again, I should also mention KPMG is not only the auditor for the city of Hamilton, they're also the auditor for Hamilton Utilities Corporation. And Lois, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, are they also the auditor for Electra? So there are some continuities as it relates to the lead partner. And
Lois is nodding affirmatively.
Yeah. So again, Councillor, I don't see any concerns, and again, I would trust KPMG as it relates to their judgment as well.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Okay, it's just, I have no basis to question this. It's just we don't want to happen south of the border. And now Lois is absolutely correct. It was a private company. It wasn't a public institution, but just to protect the taxpayers, because we have this fiduciary duty to manage our money properly. And that, it may be helpful to have a relationship and experience for the board of directors, if you will. I'm not sure we don't have a duty to take advantage of the example provided by the United States and look at a 5-year rotation. Would there be any cost consequences from KPMG if the client asked for a 5-year rotation?
You mean just of the partner?
Just of the lead auditor, yeah.
Not really. We do have partner rotation requirements in our public company space. We do it all the time. So we have a methodology to transition files between partners and make sure that information gets passed along. As well, as Carlos mentioned, we have a team underneath us that supports us who usually we try to keep that continuity in place when there's a change at the partner level, so that you have that that continuity and information residing one layer down.
Okay, thank you. And as Carlos said, it says it's sometimes a fresh set of eyes can be helpful. And so I'll hear what other members of council may be saying, but I think we should give consideration to asking KPMG, just in the interest to make sure, using the Enron example, that we don't get too comfortable with each other, that there's always that little bit of tension out there to make sure everything's proper. And I have no reason to believe it's not. We have the utmost respect in our finance staff, in particular Mike. But I just put this out for consideration. Why not be cautious and go to a rotation a little more often than 10 years, because 10 years is a long time. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further speakers or questions of our auditors? Mr. Zagaric, please.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, not a question, just a reminder to committee members that the external audit work is tendered out and it does go through a competitive process. So I'll just ask Rick or Shelley if they can just remind us when this contract expires and when it will go out to market again.
Mr. Mayle?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe there's one more year left on the audit after they'll be the auditors in place, I think, for the 2021 financial year, and we would be going out to market next year, I guess later this year, if that's the case, to have an auditor in place for the 2022 year end.
So we'd be doing an RFP this year for the auditor for 2022.
If I have the dates right, Lois could correct me because she will know better than me how many years we have left on the current engagement, 5-year engagement.
Lois?
I think you are correct that our current appointment ends with the 2021 audit.
Okay. Seeing no further speakers, may I have a mover and seconder to receive item number 9.2, moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Collins, and there's a vote on that. Councillor Collins is a thumbs up. Anyone else? And that vote carried 7-0. Thank you very much. Carlos, good luck.
Thank you.
And I've never seen any tension in the audit process. Never, ever seen tension there. Anyways, enjoy. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Item number 9.3 is the City of Hamilton Ministry of Transportation Municipal Transit Enhanced Cleaning Transfer Payment Agreement. Mr. McMullen, did you have any comments to provide the committee before we move on to discuss the item?
So through the chair, it's a report that's required. We received some money and we're required to complete a transfer payment agreement.
Thank you. Mover and a seconder, please, to put the item on the floor. Moved by Johnson, seconded by Pearson. Are there any questions or comments on the agreement? Seeing none, we'll go straight to the vote, please, Madam Clerk. Collins is a thumbs up. Thank you. And that vote carried 7-0. We're now moving on to item number 9, Protection of Privacy Policy, FCS 21003, citywide. City Manager Jeanette Smith is here and would like to provide an introduction for this item.
Thank you, and I assume you can hear me okay and nod.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
can. We can hear you very well. Thank you. Please proceed.
Great. Thank you, and through you, Deputy Mayor, and a Happy New Year to everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this item before I pass it over to Andrea, because this is a very important issue for me. Trust and confidence in government is one of our term of council priorities. When it comes to information, we need to ensure the public has greater access to city government information that is accessed by design, but it is also critical that we have privacy by design. To ensure the protection of the personal and health information we are entrusted with from so many clients across the city. And unfortunately, I am passionate about this because I've seen firsthand in my previous roles the reputational impact it has when there's a significant privacy breach of personal health information. And as you know, as your city manager, I've already had to direct a privacy review after a breach. I really feel it's important that we be proactive and take the necessary steps to prevent breaches instead of reacting to them. So approval of this policy by first AFNA and then all of council will set out all the accountability and responsibilities to support staff to comply with our legislated privacy requirements and guidelines. But having a policy is really only that critical first step. We really need an entire program that's actively managed, updated, a dedicated resource that staff can call on for advice, ensure timely investigation and responses when staff believe there is a breach, ensure all existing and new IT-enabled information systems have had a privacy impact assessment to ensure there's no risks there, and truly I could go on. So as your city manager, I do believe it's critical that we invest in a privacy program with a resource that, you know, lives this each and every day. We are a very large organization with a substantial amount of personal information, especially health information collected and managed each and every day. So thank you for that time, and I'll pass it over to Andrea, who will be accountable for the program.
Andrea Holland, our city clerk, please proceed.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, and through the chair. Following best practices that are in other organizations, staff are bringing forward this privacy policy for your consideration. The policy outlines roles and responsibilities. It speaks to an increased focus on privacy throughout the organization to embed privacy by design principles in our business processes. Most importantly, it outlines the commitment to protecting the privacy of personal information which we hold. The program will be developed to ensure ongoing operations are monitored, training is provided, procedures are put in place, and processes are evaluated, and to also manage any potential privacy breaches efficiently. Currently, we're not able to develop and support a program with our current staffing complement, and we are asking that the resource be referred to the budget deliberations. I do want to recognize there is a lot of work going on in the area of privacy. However, with our current complement, we aren't able to develop an entire program. And most importantly, I believe that our greatest protection against privacy breaches is building awareness across the organization. And I just wanted to let committee know that Lisa Barrasso, the manager of records and FOI, is here to answer any questions regarding the policy that we have before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, this is a pretty big step, and there's a lot of information in here with this new alignment, and I'm glad we're moving in this direction. But my concern is this was a walk-on item. And I first found out about it when we did agenda review, and this is an addition to the item. And I wonder why you're rushing this on when we didn't have a chance to read it, rather than wait 2 weeks.
Andrea?
Through the chair. So The agenda was published Wednesday of last week, and this was added on Friday of last week. So we are within the procedural bylaw timelines for 5 days ahead of the meeting. Certainly, staff are available at any time to answer questions for items on the agendas ahead of the meeting. We do have this on the agenda today because we are asking committee to refer the ask for the resource to the budget deliberations, which starts at the beginning of February. We were unable to schedule a governance meeting before the end of the month, and that would have been too late to bring the resource forward in the budget deliberations.
Councillor?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we've been sitting on 3 standing committees. We have a lot of information come at us, and I didn't see this after it come on. I scanned every committee generally once they become live, but I missed this because it was an add-on, I guess. I didn't realize it was as early as last Friday, but I just have trouble approving this today because it is an ask for another $107,000 for an FTE, which puts pressure on our budget. But I also like to read the actual attachment and what the policy says. So I would like to see this deferred for 2 weeks, if unless they can tell me what the urgency is. So, and certainly it's important to get this policy in place, but we've been quite some time since Jeanette's been here to get it to this position. So that's my comment. So I won't support it today if it goes ahead, but if it's deferred, I'd be happy to read it for the next meeting in 2 weeks. That's all.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Wilson, can you, oh, sorry. I don't want to go, are we done with speakers? Councillor Wilson, go ahead. That's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just if I'm making sure I'm understanding the ask today, it's just asking us to put this within the upcoming budget deliberations, and the council will have an opportunity within that context to either approve the FTE cost or not. Is that correct?
We're doing 2 things today, actually. We're doing the approval of the policy that is provided in Appendix A. And then the second item is to send the request for the 1 FTE, which was approximately 100,000, to the 2021 budget process. So we'll be approving the policy and then referring the implementation to the budget process. Does that make sense?
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. If I could ask through you, Deputy Chair, to the City Manager, I know issues of access and privacy are certainly top of mind given the world in which we live and the electronic world in which we live. I was wondering if she could, or Claire Collin could provide an insight into whether we would be leading on this or whether we would be following in terms of where other municipalities are going. Thank you.
Madam City Manager.
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor, and I'll pass it to Andrea because I did ask her to do a review of other municipalities of similar size. Certainly in my experience, because I have worked in another organization, in terms of having a robust program that's actively monitored and trained and the policy framework in place, which is what before, I would say for a city this size, we're behind. Andrea, could you speak to the other municipalities you reviewed?
Madam City Clerk.
Yes, through the chair. I agree with Jeanette's overview of the other municipalities. Other municipalities of our size do have privacy policies in place. That's where we were able to build on our privacy policy here using their policies that they already have in place, and they've been in place in larger and smaller organizations for quite some time now.
Thank you. I have a supplementary then. The vulnerability of the municipality in the absence of such a policy, are we vulnerable in terms of litigation in the absence of it and its application? Thank you.
Ms. Holland, if you want to start, and then or you can refer it to Nicole Audit.
Through the chair, I'll refer that to Nicole. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam City Solicitor. Nicole, can you hear us? Is there anyone else on the line from legal? Regrettably, I can't get an answer at the moment.
Okay.
You might be able to come back to it after other
Thank you.
additional speakers.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Oh, here's Nicole. Thank you.
My apologies.
Did you hear?
No, I didn't. I apologize.
Yeah, I did. So, Councillor Wilson, would you like to ask your question again, please?
Thank you. I would. Sorry about this, Nicole. My question was, I was trying to situate our municipality compared to others. And then subsequent to that, I was trying to understand the vulnerability from a legal perspective of the municipality in the absence of both policy and person. Thank you.
Nicole?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the situation, Councillor, is that the legislation doesn't strictly require a privacy policy. So from a liability point of view, there isn't something that it does now require the policy. So we're in the efforts of getting those completed. So reasonableness and our efforts to get those done as quickly as possible would certainly benefit the municipality.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So just to be clear, Nicole, so is the change to have or require the policy relatively new from the province?
Not new. So it's certainly in the last year or two. Andrew can correct me on the date. I believe it's within the last year or two.
Okay, thank you. Any further speakers, Madam Clerk? Not sure why my phone's going. Oh, Councillor Pearson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm reading through this as well. Councillor Ferguson, sorry, I agree. I'm just looking at the appendix. I'm a bit confused. So I'm assuming there's going to be training that is going to be part of this. And does this funding cover that? And I'm not sure if it's Andrea or Jeanette that will answer.
Ms. Holland?
Through the chair, yes, the intention with the position is that this position would develop a privacy program. This program would cover training so that we're proactive in building our awareness around privacy in the organization. It would also include monitoring, privacy breach protocol, which we have in place. But I think building on the awareness, what you end up happening is people do have questions around privacy. So we need to have a position who's able to answer those questions for staff and also the public, and that we would also start performing privacy impact assessments around some of our business processes to ensure we are monitoring and keeping our personal information private.
And I'm going to ask because I'm reading some of this, and to me, my head's just kind of going, it doesn't make sense. But I'm going to give an example. It's saying an example is this is an address personal information, and this is on the. I take it this is from the province. Where is this? Yeah, Information and Privacy Commissioner. Now I have to go back to it. So it's saying an example, a police service places a lawn sign on a property stating that this was a site of a search warrant for illicit drugs. The IPC decided that the address on the sign, because there was an address on the sign, was personal information because it revealed allegations of criminal activity against individuals associated with the property, but it's on the property. Like I'm having a difficult time saying, and for me, I'm concerned because I'm wondering how deep did this go then? So we don't use names anymore. We don't use addresses anymore. I mean, I'm not sure how these are being interpreted by the Integrity Commissioner and Privacy Commissioner.
Through the chair. So I think what we need to do is build an awareness program and put it in place that are in line with the orders that the IPC sets out and that are in line with the MFIPA legislation and PHIPA legislation that we follow. And I think by doing that, we're going to be able to get hopefully get answers out to staff to help them to do their jobs effectively and that they're falling in line with the legislation. Because I agree there is some confusion out there, but I think it's important that we build the awareness, and we need to do that through a proper formal program. I can't speak to the particular order that you're reading. No, I would have to read it in order to get you a better answer on that particular order.
Yeah, we could talk offline, but it's just it's
Okay.
on page 2 of their sheet, their reference sheet. But and then I just want to ask as well then, because here it says perfectly. I read the example of the police putting a sign on a lawn. How far does this go out as far as the corporation then? So it covers the police, it covers all of our sub agencies. Who does this all cover as far as the staff person to be hired?
Through the chair, within the policy, we've outlined the scope of who would be included under this policy. So I will tell you that Police Services Board has to deal with their own protection of privacy. So our training would not extend to the Police Services Board or the police services. They have their own privacy group, and they receive their training through that group.
So they have this in place already at the police services?
Through the chair, I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure if Lisa is aware of their program.
Lisa?
Good morning. Sorry.
Hi, Lisa. Good morning.
Through the I do not have an awareness whether the police have a dedicated privacy program. They do have a dedicated records manager, which is who is likely responsible for that component, privacy as well. But I'm not familiar about whether they have a program, a dedicated program or not.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm assuming then that at some point that information should be going out to obviously other parts of our corporation and making sure that they're protecting information as well, because it all comes back to us. If there's a complaint in the police services, it all comes back to council and the corporation. So I appreciate that, and I'll listen to the rest of the comments. I can't say that it's something I'm going to say we shouldn't be doing. I guess we have to move forward. So sending it to the budget, I'm comfortable with, and I will be rereading this and certainly direct questions as I come up with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I have no trouble passing this along to the budget process. I will have a number of questions at that time in terms of the urgency in terms of paying for the position and creating it. I do have some questions right now, if I could, and it's about privacy issues. I wonder whether this position will assist us with those matters that have been raised. In the report, it does mention that there have been committee discussions regarding the administration of MFIPA, and we've raised a number of issues at this very committee related to specifically counselors' access to information, and that those matters have been they're still unresolved. So I think the past examples I know that I've given is that I had a public meeting scheduled one evening. I mailed out a letter to the neighborhood for a planning meeting. Staff subsequently mailed a letter to a different neighborhood for a transportation-related matter, and I couldn't obviously attend both. So I later asked for the sign-in sheet to try to find out who in my constituency attended the meeting that I couldn't attend, and I was told that that was private and personal information and I didn't have access to it, which obviously creates some concern. And I know all of us around this table have also shared the whole issue of having access to the tax roll. We oftentimes get approached by our constituents. For me, sometimes it's about an absentee landlord. The property next door isn't being maintained. Could I reach out to the owners to ask them whether they could correct that situation? And when we call now, previously we had this for almost at least 20 years. When I call finance now, I'm told that I don't have access to who owns the property in order to resolve those situations. And I know others have raised the same. And so I'm reading here in terms of why this is seen as a priority, but we have so many unresolved issues that the committee has raised, and we haven't received a report back on that. And I know it's been raised multiple times because I think I've shared these same anecdotes and stories with the same committee for almost 2 consecutive terms. So I'm wondering whether this position will finally get the committee the answers it's seeking as it relates to from a parochial perspective, counselors' issues as it relates to access to information. Most of our constituents believe that this information is at our fingertips, and when I try to explain to them I don't have access to who owns the property next door, they're in shock and disbelief. And so I'm trying to understand. I heard the training aspect, but are we trying to resolve some unresolved issues that committee has raised? That is kind of alluded to in the historical background in the report, but there's no elaboration there to specifically address what has been raised and what the timelines are associated with the same.
Thank you, Councillor. Ms. Holland.
Through the chair. Yes, Councillor. So one of the things that we recognize, although council is absolutely responsible to how they handle personal information within their constituent information. However, I feel that the clerk's office has a role in providing training to council when it comes to MFIPA, PHIPA, PPIDA, when it comes to electronic documentation, how you handle certain situations with your constituents and how you're able to receive consent from them in order to get access to certain information. So within this role, one of the things we absolutely want to do is build a training program that absolutely includes council and their staff, we also can prepare a guide for council when it comes to records management and privacy and your obligations under the Act. I think there needs to be some clarity of roles within that training as to what staff are able to share with members of council and the reasons behind that. I agree that there are some concerns, but there are also some areas where we cannot share information between each other, and we need to decide how we can make that possible. Because when it comes to consent and receiving consent from constituents, there are circumstances where you can share information provided you get the consent from the constituent. So I think we need to work on that and together and how we can make that happen.
Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Andrea. I know that we have a training component every start of the new term as part of our orientation process. I specifically recall, some of those issues being raised. So is this enhanced training, or is it? Can you elaborate on that? I thought much of what you just referenced is information that we've already been provided from a counselor perspective. I'm not speaking to other areas of the organization.
Ms. Holland.
Councillor, it's really a chance for this position would be reviewing that information and make sure that it's always kept current. Because as new orders come down, we do need to adjust our training to make sure that we're always consistent with what the IPC is making decisions on.
Okay, those are my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, if you can take the floor for a second, please. Or take the chair, sorry. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
You can take the floor too if you want, but. Okay, just some quick questions. Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Holland. IPC, they make these decisions, and you just spoke to how the decisions have to be applied to our policy and our implementation. So can you just address that or elaborate on that for me, please?
Through the chair. So as a regular process, Lisa and her team do monitor the orders that the IPC brings forward. But I think what we need to do is start communicating that out to council and certainly staff. When we have a formal program in place, we're going to be able to review those orders and then apply a lens of the corporation on top of them. And once we have that formal program in place, we're going to be able to easily identify where those orders and decisions may have impacts across the organization.
Thank you for that. Follow up with regards to the different acts that Lisa and yourself and the entire city has some responsibility for. I found the Personal Health Information Protection Act. Does that act apply to municipal services?
Through the chair, yes, it does. So If you're looking at personal health information, you're looking at information that may be collected through Parks and Rec registration. It may be collected through EMS. It may be collected through our public health services.
And even social services.
Social services as well, yes.
Yep. The next one that I found was a federal piece of legislation, which is the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. It sounds like a very heady act. Does that act apply to municipalities?
Through the chair. So within that act, it outlines that, you know, provincially, it's sort of yes and no. We certainly look at that as a best practice when it comes to electronic document management, but it's really focused on the private sector. And the Act also recognizes that provincially there may be acts where we have to that we fall under. So specifically, we are legislated to fall under PHIPA and MFIPA, but we certainly look at PPITA as a best practice as well.
Thank you. And then we have the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, which we're all familiar with. So we have access by design, privacy by design. Over the weekend, I started to try to assess the number of records that the municipality would have under their control that they have to protect. There are 600,000 residents, there are thousands of businesses. So all of those records and all of any identifier of an individual have to be protected, even if it's kept in an electronic database by law, correct?
Ms. Holland?
Through the chair, absolutely. Any information, regardless of the format which we hold it, we need to protect personal information.
Okay,
and
so
that is legislated under MFIPA for us.
Yeah. So just some quick comments, Madam Chair, if I may. I understand that the obligation on the municipality and on the councillors as the board of directors for the municipality are significant. The protection of privacy of any individual records ultimately falls to us. We can blame the clerk or blame a department for the leak or the mistake, but at the end of the day, we have to demonstrate to the Information and Privacy Commissioner that we have a policy in place and that we're following the policy. And if we do that, for the most part, and I think Nicole could speak to this, for the most part, we were indemnified of action against us if we can demonstrate that we have the policy and we've followed the policy. Is that a fair statement, Nicole?
Ms. Otti?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, certainly an active council-approved policy does assist in those defenses, absolutely. It wouldn't necessarily be a blanket absolution, but it certainly does assist.
Yeah, it's not a get-out-of-jail card by any extent of the imagination, but it certainly does help mitigate any allegations of a privacy breach down the road. So I think I'm with Councillor Collins. First off, I fully support the policy. The policy is essential. We have to have it. It's long overdue. I can tell you that in my second term, I had raised this with Chris Murray, and I raised it on the floor at the AFNA, and the city was to look at it and come back with policies for access by design and privacy by design. Interestingly enough, it's this year that we are actually moving forward with access by design, and we're implementing it. And now we have the privacy by design policy before us. So I fully support the approval of the policy. The next step is having the debate and the deliberation as to how we implement it and how we cost it. And that will happen during the budget process. So I support what's before us today. I think it's long overdue, in my opinion. Thank you very much. I'll take the chair back, Councillor Wilson, and I thank you for your assistance today.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from anyone else? Seeing none, I can't recall if I have a mover and seconder. Councillor Ferguson lost power. Okay, so we cut the power line to Councillor Ferguson's house, so he can't participate anymore. Isn't that sneaky of us? No, he's lost power in Ancaster, so he has no way of getting back in. So we need a mover and a seconder on this. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Seeing no further comments, we'll put the question. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Collins? Yeah, you're good. 6-0. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on in our agenda, there are no motions. Are there any notices of motion? There is. There was one from Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson, if you'd like to proceed with your notice.
Thank you. And with discussion today, I would like to waive the rules to move the motion. Would you like me to read off the motion first, or has everybody got a copy from Angela today?
So we're at the notice of motion phase. So if you could read the notice of motion off, then we will move to the waiver motion, and then we'll move to, depending on how it works out, the final motion. So please read it out for us.
Thank you. So whereas the Famille Florine of Hamilton is a social and cultural center for Italians from the Friuli, the northeasternmost region of Italy, and nonprofit community-based organization with membership comprised mostly of people from the Friulian origin, and whereas Famille Florine of Hamilton's revenues have been significantly impacted by the coronavirus pandemic, whereas the organization is comprised of volunteers, and whereas on November the 30th, 2020, Famille Florine of Hamilton had a new volunteer testing their fire alarm, and he was unaware that the fire department needed to be contacted first, and whereas Famille Florine of Hamilton was therefore issued a false alarm fee as per the City of Hamilton's user fee bylaw. Therefore, let it be resolved that the staff be directed to waive the false alarm fee of $753.50 for this event. My apologies, there's an amendment in here and I have to capture that. I can't find it. And that staff communicate with our two Famille Florine of Hamilton that this is a one-time waiving of the fee only for 2021.
So after the word event, I believe it was comma, as compassionate relief. Comma.
Thank you. Comma. So that the staff be directed to waive the false alarm fee of $753.50 for this event, comma, as compassionate relief, comma, and that staff communicate with Famille Florine of the Hamilton that this is a one-time waiving of the 2021.
Thank you.
Fee only.
Thank you very much. And so now we will move with your waiver motion. So you're moving the motion to waive the rules to introduce it today, and that is being seconded by Councillor Pearson.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And we'll have that vote. That vote carries 6-0. So now the motion is before us. The motion will be moved by yourself and by Councillor Pearson. Is that correct? Yes, thank you. Do you have any comments on the motion, Councillor?
Yes, there was some discussion earlier. I believe that the motion directs the waiving of the, so therefore the invoice does not have to be sent. So therefore it's not coming out of any reserves. It is a one-time forgiveness bill. So I would really appreciate this, folks. Yesterday we discussed about small businesses and how they've been impacted. And with the Famille Florine, their revenues have completely disappeared because of COVID. And compared to some of the amounts that come across our desk, as one recently, this seems pretty minimal, but to an organization with little to no monies being generated at this time, this amount is very huge on their budget. So I'd appreciate your support.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote. And it carried 6-0.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, for your guidance in this and everyone else for your support.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Any further notices of motion from anybody? Seeing none. General information, other business? Seeing none, may I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the closed session minutes of the December 10th, 2020 meeting? Moved by Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. And that's an electronic vote, please. And that motion carried 6-0. Now I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Johnson. And that's an electronic vote. Please don't leave until you vote. I expect that carried unanimously, councillors, which it did, 6-0. Have yourselves a wonderful day. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great job. Take care.
Thank you.